Welcome to our webcast all about the muscular system. There are three main functions of the muscular system. The primary function is to allow our body to move both inside and outside the body. Almost all movement of the body is the result of muscle contractions. In fact, it takes 200 muscles in our bodies to take just one step. There are muscles that help with digestion, circulation of blood, and voluntary movements. The muscular system is also responsible for maintaining our posture and body shape. Without muscles, our bones would not be able to stand up or move in any way. Therefore, the muscles are very important to stabilizing bones and supporting bone joints. The third and final function of the muscular system is to generate body heat. 85% of the heat in our body is the product of muscle contractions. When your body is cold, the muscles will involuntarily contract, producing heat and warming up the body. Now here's some basic vocabulary. Myology is the study of structure, arrangement, and actions of muscles. Isotonic contractions are contractions where muscle length changes, whereas isometric activity are contractions where muscle length does not change. Muscle fiber is tiny fibers of muscle that bunch together and contract. And so myofibrils are one of the elongated contractile fibers found within striated muscle cells, and sarcomeres are the structural and functional units of a myofibril, which you can see in this picture. So here's some vocab about the skeletal muscle. The endomysium is the sheath of connective tissue that surrounds an individual skeletal muscle fiber. The epimysium is the covering of muscle connective tissue sheath surrounding each muscle. Perimysium is the sheath of connective tissue that encloses a bundle of skeletal muscle fibers. And you can see how they all interact around the muscle fibers in this picture right here. And some vocabulary about the joints are the tendon is the cord of connective tissue that attaches muscle to bone. The ligament is tough, flexible, fibrous tissue that connects two bones or cartilages. The extensor is a muscle that straightens a joint, and the flexor is a muscle that bends a joint.
Okay, now we're going to talk about the three types of muscles. The first type of muscle tissue is called smooth or visceral. Like the name suggests, the muscle is found in the walls of visceral organs. These organs include the small intestine, the stomach, the bladder, and blood vessels. These muscles are in charge of moving food through the digestive system. These muscles move involuntarily, which means that these muscles move without conscious control. These muscle tissues are non-striated, which means they don't have any stripes or streaks on them, which leads them to appear smooth, unlike the other two types of muscles. The smooth muscle fibers are also relatively small and tapered with a centrally located nucleus. The second type of blood vessel is cardiac. The cardiac muscle tissue, also known as myocardium, is the muscle that makes up the walls of the heart. This muscle involuntarily contracts to pump blood through the aorta and relaxes to allow blood back into the right atrium. Unlike the smooth muscles, cardiac muscle tissue is striated. This muscle is also composed of branch fibers and a single central nucleus. Cardiac muscle fibers also contain intercalated discs that connect every cell. These discs are bands that hold adjacent cells together and allow ions to quickly diffuse through the cells to help the muscle impulses travel through the cells. Something unique about the muscles of the heart is that they, in a healthy individual, never tire, especially in comparison to the other two types of muscles. This is due to the large amount of mitochondria within the cardiac muscle tissues. 30 to 35% of cardiac tissue in a healthy human is composed of mitochondria. Mitochondria perform cellular respiration, which breaks down nutrients in order to create ATP energy. This large amount of mitochondria allows the cardiac muscles to have enough energy to constantly function and never have the need to rest. The last muscle tissue is skeletal. Skeletal muscles are probably the muscles you think of when you hear the word muscle. These are the muscles that attach to the bones in the body that allow us to run, jump, walk, and do many of the other physical activities in our lives. So unlike the other two types of muscles, skeletal muscles are voluntary. Voluntary movement is stimulated by nerve impulses that travel through the nervous system, which cause these skeletal muscles to contract and move. Unlike the cardiac muscles, the skeletal muscles do not have a lot of mitochondria. Because skeletal muscles are composed of only 1 to 2% mitochondria, they must have an alternate source of energy to function. This energy source is called glycogen. Glycogen is simply stored energy that can be transformed into ATP energy for use. Structurally, skeletal muscles are composed of striated muscle fiber with many nuclei on the edges of the cell.
Because there are tons of muscles in the body, scientists have created a sort of naming system to make it easier to locate and remember all of the muscles. Each muscle is named based on many different factors, including location, size, shape, direction, origins, and action. Many receive their name based on their anatomical origin. If a muscle has abdominis in its name, it can be found in the abdominal region, right about here. Location can also be based on what bone the muscle is attached to. Can you guess where the tibialis anterior is located? Yep, on the anterior portion of the tibia. We also classify muscles by their shape, size, and direction. Deltoids, for example, have a triangular shape. The rhomboid major is a rhombus or diamond shape. For size, there are 3 muscles within the gluteal region, each defined by their size. We have the gluteus maximus, the largest, the gluteus medius, the mid-sized one, and the gluteus minimus, the smallest. And if a muscle is defined by its direction, we are talking about how the muscle fibers run within. So for example, muscles running transversely, left to right, in the abdominal region are the transverse abdominis. Finally, muscles can be named due to their function. Flexors flex a muscle, abductors abduct a muscle, and adductors adduct a structure. There are many more naming categorizations than these, but this just gives you an idea of the naming process. So this is kind of how it all works, how a muscle contracts and relaxes. We will discuss the simple basics on how muscles move. The nervous system plays a very large role in how and when a muscle moves. The sequence of events leading to contraction is initiated somewhere in the central nervous system, either as a voluntary activity from the brain or as a reflex activity from the spinal cord. First, a signal is sent from the brain or the spinal cord to the muscle via motor neurons. What happens next is sort of confusing unless you have an extensive background in the neuroscience and chemistry, so I will only briefly describe it. You don't need to know the details at all. The main act that causes a muscle to contract is an action potential, or electrical signal sent by neurons. This action potential releases calcium and various other neurotransmitters, which this release is what is mainly responsible for a muscle to contract. And here's a little fun fact. You've all probably been running or exercising and felt a cramp or stitch in your side. Have you ever wondered what causes it to occur? Well, it is due to an imbalance of blood electrolytes such as calcium, potassium, and sodium in your body. Your muscles, due to heightened activity, have been overstimulated, resulting in either too much or too little calcium, or another electrolyte being released. The cramps usually pass when your body has compensated for the imbalance and returned to a new homeostasis.
So this slide here just has a broad overview by which the muscular system maintains homeostasis, and the mechanisms that I'm going to be talking about are kind of depend on a sort of negative feedback mechanism because they maintain a certain level of like normalness, so like a certain body temperature, i.e. But if the body detects something that changes, then the mechanism for homeostasis is turned on. And once it's regained the baseline, the mechanism turns off again. Both the turning on and off require a stimulus. So that's where the stimulus comes in. Then there are the receptors in the control center, which is a set point, which is compared to like the 98.2 degrees Fahrenheit for the body. The effectors, which are muscles or glands. In our case, it's muscles because we're talking about the muscular system. And the response, which is the change is corrected, and the stimulus again stops whatever is happening previously. So this next slide just kind of is an overview of different types of like homeostasis the body has to maintain. But the 2 types of homeostasis I'm going to talk about specifically are temperature and blood flow. And yes, vasodilation, sweating, pylorelaxation, stretching out, etc. do have to do with temperature, but the way in which specifically the muscular system interacts with temperature is when you're shivering. So when you're cold, you start shivering to heat you up, but that shivering comes from your muscles because muscles generate heat, which then causes the shivering to stop because the metabolism also gives off heat as the body works, and that's essentially how that one works. Also, the vasodilation, vasoconstriction is obviously controlled by the cardiac muscle, but the cardiac type of like blood flow I'm talking about is when you exercise. So the cardiac muscle helps maintain homeostasis with fueling the blood flow. When you exercise more, you need more oxygen, so you pump faster, and when you cool down, you need to take it down a notch, so the heart slows down. So basically, homeostasis comes from maintaining temperature and fueling blood flow. And then let's move on to the next slide. So let's talk a little bit about the medical problems. So I think it's really important to know that that like myopathy refers to general muscle disease, whereas dystrophy is a specific type of myopathy in which muscle fibers degenerate. Here's an example of fibers with MD, muscular dystrophy, and normal biceps. You can see that the fibers are like far thinner and they're not as like nice and like plump and thick. There are multiple types of myopathy. So there's inflammatory myopathy, which is polymyotosis, which is the inflammation of the progressive weakening of skeletal muscles. And as we mentioned all earlier, skeletal muscles are just the ones that control the voluntary movements. There's dermamyosis, which is the polymyositis with the skin rash. Then there's also inclusion body myositis, which is a progressive muscle weakening and wasting. And then muscular dystrophies, as I mentioned, are another type of common disorder, and they affect the muscle fibers because they interfere with the chemical reactions involving drawing energy from food, i.e. metabolism, so cellular respiration. They generally appear at birth or infancy, and they cause a problem with the muscle and the nerve that stimulates the muscle even. The other type of medical problem we can talk about is neuromuscular junction, which impairs the transmission of nerve signals, most common in the myasthenia gravis, which is a weakness of the skeletal muscles. And this is like a really long medical complicated subject, but essentially what happens is that there's a lock and key method in which a receptor fits a specific type of stimulus like molecule, and if the receptor is deformed, then the molecule won't dock and it won't trigger the response. So if there's a problem with the receptor or a problem with the molecule, then you can't make the body do what you want it to do. So that's the end of our webcast. Thank you for watching, and I hope you learned stuff about the muscular system.